Welcome back to The Explainer. Guys, today we are looking at a massive, completely unexpected plot twist in the global AI race. We're diving into this crazy story of high geopolitical stakes, alleged industrial espionage, and a really shocking revelation regarding China's highly celebrated Kimi K3 model. I mean, it is a story that literally flips the script on what we thought we knew just a few days ago.
So, just 1 week ago, we were sitting here covering what looked to be China's greatest AI victory to date, Kimi K3, which is this staggering 2.8 trillion parameter open source model, had just topped the global coding leaderboard. And it happened on the exact same day Google failed to ship its rebuilt flagship for the third time. It genuinely felt like a monumental breakthrough, like a real shift in the balance of power in artificial intelligence. But get this, yesterday the White House stepped in and basically said, hold on, that victory, it wasn't actually real.
In this quote right here, it brilliantly illustrates the bombshell that just dropped. The White House is alleging that this massive win was actually a copy built on stolen American technology. Michael Kratsios, the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, stated publicly that the Chinese company behind K3, Moonshot AI, covertly queried Anthropic's Fable model at a massive scale. If this allegation holds up, the Chinese model that destroyed every benchmark last week was not an independent innovation. It was a heist.
Okay, so let's dive right into this. To figure out how this heist supposedly went down, we need to look at 4 key areas. Number 1, the allegation itself. 2, the evidence and the crucial caveats. 3, the channel arc. And 4, what happens next.
All right, starting with Section 1, the allegation.
So the core of this whole accusation revolves around this concept called AI distillation. Basically, it's the process of systematically querying an existing model's outputs to train a new model to mimic its behavior. Think of it like a restaurant analogy, right? Imagine you really want a famous chef's secret recipe, but there's no way you're getting access to their kitchen. But what you can do is order their signature dish 10 million times, rigorously analyze the taste, the texture, the ingredients, and figure out the exact recipe just from the final product. That is exactly what Moonshot AI is accused of doing, querying Anthropic's Fable millions of times to teach their own K3 model how to behave exactly like Fable without ever legitimately accessing Fable's underlying architecture or its weights.
Now, we absolutely have to make a critical distinction here. Distillation itself, it's not inherently a bad thing. In fact, legitimate distillation is used all the time by companies to make smaller, faster, cheaper versions of their own models by training them on their own outputs. It plays a huge, vital role in the open innovation ecosystem. However, Kratsios explicitly distinguished that normal, everyday practice from what he called large-scale, covert industrial distillation. And Moonshot AI is being accused of this second category, systematically querying a competitor's model specifically to steal proprietary U.S. tech.
But wait, the allegation actually goes even deeper than just the software side of things. Kratsios added a second major claim regarding hardware, saying that Moonshot AI somehow acquired banned NVIDIA GB300 servers. Now, these chips are part of the super advanced Blackwell generation, which is strictly forbidden from being sold to Chinese companies under current U.S. export controls. According to the White House, Moonshot completely evaded these controls by routing their operations through a third country, physically accessing those GB300 chips over in Thailand to run this massive, computationally expensive distillation process.
And man, the geopolitical stakes were instantly laid bare by this. U.S. Undersecretary of State Jacob Hellberg really escalated the situation with this powerful quote, framing the incident not just as corporate espionage, but as an assault on fair and honest competition across global economies. To put some serious weight behind those words, Treasury Secretary Bessent is now signaling that heavy financial sanctions against Moonshot AI are currently under active consideration. And you know, this actually follows a State Department directive from way back in April that specifically named Moonshot in a diplomatic cable regarding pervasive intellectual property theft.
Which brings us to Section 2, the evidence and, very importantly, the caveats.
Now, what is really fascinating about the data backing up these claims is this compelling statistical cross-entropy analysis done independently by Redwood Research. They rigorously tested Kimi K3's behavior and found that the model, quote, identifies as Claude disproportionately often. I mean, in at least one documented conversation, Kimi K3 literally stated, "I am Claude," when asked about its identity. Now, while this behavior is highly statistically consistent with a model that was distilled directly from Anthropic's Claude, we do have to note that it's a fascinating and super shareable detail, but it's not definitive, irrefutable proof all on its own.
Then we've got the timeline problem, and honestly, this is arguably the most intriguing piece of the whole puzzle. Look at this incredibly tight window. Anthropic's Fable 5 was only made publicly available starting July 1st, 2026. Kimi K3 launched just 15 days later, on July 16th. 15 days! Industry experts are pointing out that distilling a massive 2.8 trillion parameter model from just 15 days of public API access is practically impossible. So this timeline really suggests one of two realities. Either Moonshot had some sort of unauthorized covert access to Fable before July 1st, like maybe during a limited preview or the US ban period, or alternatively, the US government might be somewhat overstating the actual role Fable played in K3's core development.
Plus, this accusation definitely doesn't exist in a vacuum. Anthropic had already accused Moonshot AI of distillation back in February of 2026, which was months before Kimi K3 even launched. And they also leveled the exact same distillation accusations at other prominent Chinese AI firms too, including DeepSeek and Minimax. So we're looking at a very clear, documented pattern of concern from Anthropic regarding the systematic theft of their intellectual property.
But okay, here's the absolutely crucial point where we have to take a step back and stay objective. We have to acknowledge the caveats. The US government hasn't disclosed how they actually obtained this specific intelligence. There is absolutely no legal finding or court ruling that exists at this time. Moonshot AI has, so far, completely ignored requests for comment. Actually, scratch that. China's foreign ministry did respond, but they simply deflected the questions to a spokesperson. So what we really have here is a highly credible allegation coming from senior US officials that aligns with statistical evidence. But we have to remember, it is not yet a proven fact. As focused learners, it is so important that we separate what is alleged from what is legally proven.
All right, moving on to Section 3, the channel arc.
If you've been following our journey on this explainer, you are going to see how perfectly our past coverage set up this exact moment. It aligns so well with the broader geopolitical AI story we've been tracking. Remember in explainer number 4, we covered the US government actively banning Fable 5 for 18 days strictly on national security grounds. Then in explainer 7, we broke down that staggering economic reality where 46% of US enterprise AI usage was flowing to cheaper Chinese models. Explainer 10 looked at Xi Jinping's aggressive keynote bid for global AI governance at Wake. And finally, in explainer 12, we covered the moment Kimi K3 topped the coding benchmarks, which is an event that we, and basically the rest of the tech world, hailed as China's biggest AI victory. And that brings us to what is just the ultimate, inescapable irony of this entire situation. Think about it. The US government temporarily banned Fable specifically to protect it, trying their best to prevent advanced AI capabilities from reaching foreign adversaries. Yet, according to these very serious White House allegations, Moonshot accessed Fable anyway, before the ban even fully lifted, and used it to build the exact model that the world just celebrated as China's massive breakthrough. If these allegations are true, it's this chilling realization that US export controls and model access restrictions completely and utterly failed to prevent the very thing they were explicitly designed to block. So, where do we go from here? Section 4, what happens next?
Let's look at our actionable fallout checklist, because this impacts the whole market. First off, you absolutely need to circle July 27th on your calendar and watch it closely. Moonshot had promised to release Kimi K3's actual open weights on that date. But if US Treasury sanctions land before then, the most anticipated open source release of the entire year might be completely blocked before it even ships. Because of this high risk, our strong caution to enterprise teams is to hold off on any plans to download or self-host Kimi K3 until the sanctions picture actually clears up. Trust me, you do not want your enterprise infrastructure tangled up in a massive international intellectual property dispute.
Now, while you're holding off, you should definitely be evaluating OpenAI Presence, which just launched on July 22nd. It's a really fascinating contrast to all this controversy, right? While a huge part of the industry is totally bogged down discussing alleged Chinese IP theft, the Western AI ecosystem is just pushing forward with legitimate, highly secure enterprise solutions. OpenAI Presence is this brand new enterprise agent platform deliberately designed to connect AI agents securely to your internal company databases, APIs, Slack, email, the whole shebang. It represents the actual infrastructure layer needed to make AI agents useful in real production environments, and it's built firmly under Western rules and compliance standards.
So, what does this all mean? The big takeaway we really have to walk away with today is this. The AI race is clearly no longer just about which model scores the highest on some coding benchmark. The reality is so much more complex and heavily contested. Who built what, with whose data, on whose chips, and under whose rules? For Kimi K3, the answers to every single one of those questions are now the subject of a massive geopolitical dispute. A week ago, we called Kimi K3 China's biggest AI win. Today, we're exploring the White House's detailed claim that it was stolen. Make sure to subscribe to The Explainer so you always know what's actually happening beneath the surface, and not just what it looked like at the time. Thank you so much for learning with us, and we'll see you in the next one.
Last week, China launched an artificial intelligence model so incredibly powerful that it just it humiliated Silicon Valley on the global coding leaderboards.
Yeah, it was a massive shock to the system.
Right. But today, the White House is claiming that same exact Chinese triumph is actually an American model wearing this, highly sophisticated digital mask.
A completely different narrative than what we were dealing with just a few days ago.
Exactly.
Yep.
So welcome to the deep dive. We are looking at this huge stack of freshly declassified briefing documents, geopolitical analyses, and some really dense, highly technical forensic reports detailing what might actually be the most complex intellectual property heist of the digital age.
It really is a profound shift. I mean, we are moving from this broad conversation about the pace of global innovation to a deeply technical state-level forensic investigation.
And our mission today is to unpack that investigation for you. We need to understand how the model that everyone celebrated just days ago as China's greatest AI victory, Moonshot AI's Kimi K3, is now sitting at the very center of an international scandal.
Right.
We're going to examine exactly what the White House alleges happened, the very specific mechanisms they supposedly used to pull it off, and crucially, what this means for your own enterprise software and deployment decisions.
Which is the most important part for people listening.
Definitely. Because if you are integrating these tools into your daily workflow, the ground just shifted entirely underneath you.
It did. And to really appreciate the gravity of these allegations, we first have to look at the atmosphere just 1 week ago, July 16th, 2026.
Right. That was the big day. That was the day Moonshot AI released Kimi K3. And for those of you who track the underlying math of these systems, Kimi K3 isn't just some standard chatbot. It is a 2.8 trillion parameter open source model.
Which is just an astronomical number.
It is. A parameter count that high represents a level of complexity that dictates how nuanced the model's neural pathways are. It allows it to process and generate logic at a scale we rarely, if ever, see outside of closely guarded proprietary Western tech.
Yeah, and when it dropped, it didn't just perform well. It entirely dominated the global coding arenas.
It wiped the floor with them. And the timing was so theatrical, too. It happened on the exact same day that Google announced yet another delay for its rebuild flagship model.
The juxtaposition there was impossible to ignore. I mean, the tech community viewed it as this definitive changing of the guard.
Oh, 100%.
The prevailing theory was that Chinese open source developers had finally, outpaced American corporate labs, that they had overcome these intense trade restrictions through just sheer engineering ingenuity.
But the narrative just totally inverted yesterday.
It did.
Michael Kratsios, who's the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, the OSTP, issued a statement claiming this whole breakthrough was an illusion.
A very strong word to use.
Very strong. The specific allegation is that Moonshot AI did not organically build Kimi K3 from scratch. Instead, the OSTP claims Moonshot constructed this covert internal platform to systematically query and extract the underlying intelligence of Anthropic's Fable model.
Which is incredibly significant because Anthropic's Fable is currently regarded as the absolute bleeding edge of American AI reasoning capability. It is a highly, highly guarded asset.
Right, so we really need to dissect the mechanics of how this supposedly works. Because this isn't a traditional theft.
No, not at all.
You don't just break into a server farm and download a USB drive full of weights and algorithms. The briefing documents repeatedly use this term, distillation.
Distillation, yes.
So for a listener who might be familiar with the outputs of AI but not the underlying architecture, how does the distillation process actually function?
Well, the best way to understand distillation is to just move away from the idea of stealing code and instead think about observing behavior.
Okay, behavior.
Right. In machine learning, distillation is the process of using an incredibly advanced, highly capable existing model, we call that the teacher, to train a brand new, usually smaller model, which is the student. So you feed the teacher millions of complex prompts. You record its perfectly reasoned outputs, and then you use that synthetic data to train the student. The student essentially learns the statistical patterns of the master.
Okay, so it's less like stealing the physical blueprints of a sports car and more like, training a chess prodigy.
It's a good way to look at it.
Like, you aren't looking at the Grandmaster's actual brain scans to see how their neurons fire. You are simply recording 10 million of their past moves.
Exactly.
And by forcing your student to predict the grandmaster's next move over and over and over, the student's neural pathways eventually mimic the master's logic entirely.
That captures the mechanism perfectly. You extract the knowledge, the reasoning capabilities, the linguistic nuance, all without ever possessing the underlying weights or the proprietary architecture.
Wow.
And it is critical to clarify here, as Kratsios actually does in the OSTP briefing, that distillation itself is a standard, totally legitimate practice.
Right. I mean, companies do this internally all the time, don't they? Constantly. I mean, if a major lab spends hundreds of millions of dollars in compute to train a massive frontier model, they naturally want to monetize it, right?
Of course.
But a 2 trillion parameter model is way too heavy to run on a standard enterprise server or a smartphone. So they use their own flagship model to distill a smaller, much more efficient version.
Right, to make it actually usable for everyday applications.
Yes. It is a cornerstone of the open innovation ecosystem.
Yeah.
They own the teacher model, so they have the complete legal and ethical right to train the student.
But the White House is alleging something entirely different here.
Very different.
They are accusing Moonshot of, quote, covert industrial distillation. They are claiming Moonshot used an external proprietary model that they did not own to train their own flagship product.
Exactly.
But this is where I kind of struggle with the logistics outlined in the report. Let's just look at this practically for a second.
Sure.
Anthropic is a multi-billion-dollar company. They have entire divisions dedicated entirely to network security and anomaly detection.
They do. If a foreign entity tries to query a guarded model 10 million times to harvest synthetic data, wouldn't the sheer volume of identical tokens being generated wouldn't it trigger a massive network-wide alert?
You would think so, yeah.
Like if my credit card is run through a terminal in 2 different states in the exact same hour, the system freezes it instantly. How do you mask an operation of this incredible scale?
That logistical hurdle is exactly why Kratsios emphasized the phrase sophisticated internal platform in the briefing.
Oh, okay.
The allegation is not that a small team of engineers manually scraped an API over a weekend. It implies a highly coordinated infrastructure built specifically to evade rate limits and security triggers.
So they had to build a machine just to hide the machine.
Essentially, yes. To bypass those anomaly detection systems, you have to utilize a vast, highly distributed proxy network.
Meaning they aren't just using one IP address sitting in an office in Beijing. They are routing queries through thousands of seemingly unconnected servers globally.
Correct. Use IP spoofing to make the traffic look like organic, everyday requests coming from typical users in Europe, South America, or the United States.
Right.
And you use token batching to ensure no single account pulls down suspicious amounts of data at once. You carefully pace the queries to sit just barely below Anthropic's rate-limiting thresholds.
That sounds incredibly complex.
It is. You essentially have to engineer a massive digital masking machine just to facilitate the extraction of the data in the first place.
But harvesting millions of lines of synthetic data is only the first phase, right?
That's right. That's just getting the recipe.
Exactly. Because even if Moonshot successfully accumulated a mountain of perfect fable outputs, they still face a monumental physics problem.
It's a compute bottleneck.
Right. You cannot train a 2.8 trillion parameter model even if you're using a highly refined distilled data set on just standard servers. It requires an extraordinary amount of physical compute power.
It really does.
Which brings us to the second major allegation in the OSTP document, which is the physical hardware heist.
And the software allegations only hold weight if they are backed by the physical infrastructure capable of processing all that data.
Right. You need the engine.
Exactly. And the OSTP specifically points to the NVIDIA GB300 server clusters.
Now, for our listeners who are really focused on the hardware layer of all this, the GB300 is part of NVIDIA's Blackwell generation.
Yes.
This isn't just high-end consumer tech. This is the absolute bleeding edge of silicon architecture, designed specifically for the parallel processing required by massive neural networks. And these chips are under strict U.S. export controls.
They are heavily, heavily restricted. I mean, the U.S. strategy over the last 2 years has been very clear.
To choke off the supply, right?
Yes, to choke off the supply of the most advanced silicon to foreign adversaries. The GB300s are literally the engines of the AI arms race.
Right.
The reason the Commerce Department placed outright bans on selling these specific Blackwell chips to Chinese firms is to prevent exactly this level of capability scaling.
Because it's not just about making better chatbots.
No, not at all. An AI model of this size possesses serious dual-use applications. It can optimize civilian logistics and write code, sure, but it can also rapidly accelerate cyber warfare capabilities or run military infrastructure modeling.
Yet, the briefing documents allege that Moonshot acquired access to these exact GB300 servers. But not in Beijing. They accessed them in Thailand.
Which is the real wild card here.
It highlights this fascinating and honestly kind of terrifying loophole. How does a sanctioned entity lease Tier 1 cloud compute in a non-embargoed country without triggering Know Your Customer or KYC laws?
Well, it exposes the inherently porous nature of global supply chains in the cloud era.
Right.
Physical export controls are designed for physical goods. You can put an embargo on a physical crate of silicon and stop a cargo ship from unloading those chips in Shanghai.
Right, you have a physical border check.
Exactly. But if those same chips are legally sold to a third-party data center in Bangkok, the whole dynamic changes.
Because now they're just on the internet.
Yes. A shell company incorporated in a neutral jurisdiction can legally lease that compute power. And then engineers sitting in a lab in Beijing can securely log in via the cloud and run their massive training clusters remotely.
So U.S. jurisdiction completely fractures at the network level. We are trying to enforce physical borders on technology that is fundamentally distributed and accessed via, anonymous API keys.
It reveals a massive paradigm mismatch. The regulatory framework we are using is designed for the 20th century, but the technology operates on a borderless 21st century cloud architecture.
It's like trying to catch water with a net.
Exactly. And you can really see the frustration regarding this specific loophole bleeding into the diplomatic rhetoric right now.
The language is unusually sharp for official government releases, I have to say.
Very sharp.
The documents quote U.S. Undersecretary of State Jacob Hellberg, who literally categorized this incident as, quote, an assault on every economy that prizes the entrepreneur, rewards private capital, and relies on fair and honest competition.
That is not standard diplomatic phrasing.
No, it's not. And furthermore, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent signaled that active economic sanctions against Moonshot are under immediate consideration.
That rhetoric tells us the U.S. government views this not just as some intellectual property dispute between two rival corporations. They view it as a systemic threat to national economic security.
Right, they are taking off the gloves.
They are. They are laying the groundwork for severe, potentially crippling punitive measures. And if you look at the broader intelligence timeline provided in the briefing, this was not a reactionary announcement just because Kimi K3 topped the leaderboards last week.
Right, there is a totally fascinating historical footnote here. The documents reference an April 2026 State Department directive.
Yes, that was a key detail.
This was a diplomatic cable ordering U.S. embassies worldwide to actively document suspected IP theft by Chinese AI companies. And Moonshot AI was explicitly named in that directive back in April.
Which indicates the White House and the intelligence community have been building this forensic case for months.
Long before the public knew anything.
Exactly. They were tracking the data flows and the hardware acquisitions long before Kimi K3 was ever introduced to the public.
Which naturally forces us to look at the actual forensic evidence. Because if the State Department is threatening to sever a major tech firm from the entire global financial system, the burden of proof has to be immense.
The evidence has to be ironclad.
Right. So let's examine the digital fingerprints less out in these briefings, because this is where the forensic science gets incredibly interesting. The documents lean very heavily on an independent statistical analysis conducted by Redwood Research.
Yes, Redwood Research ran what is known in the field as a cross-entropy analysis on Kimi K3's behavior.
Okay, we should definitely break that down, because cross-entropy sounds like a dense academic buzzword, but it is actually a highly specific mathematical tool for catching clones.
It is.
So how does a researcher use cross-entropy to actually prove a model was distilled?
Well, cross-entropy, at least in the context of large language models, essentially measures the probability distribution of the next word. When you ask an AI a complex coding question, there are thousands of technically correct ways for it to generate the response, right?
Sure, just like human writing a paragraph. There are lots of ways to say the same thing.
Exactly. But if Anthropic's Fable model has a highly unusual, very specific statistical quirk in how it structures a Python function or formats its syntax, the odds of another, entirely separate model organically developing that exact same statistical quirk are astronomically low.
I see. It would be like two students writing a 10-page essay on the Roman Empire, and using the exact same unusual adjective in the exact same sentence, in the exact same paragraph.
Precisely. It's a dead giveaway.
Yeah.
The cross-entropy analysis measures how often Kimi K3 predicts the exact same next token as Fable.
And what did they find?
Redwood's statistical testing showed that K3 mirrors Fable's probability distributions at a rate that simply defies independent development.
It's just too similar.
Way too similar. But the most damning piece of evidence cited isn't just a mathematical probability, it is a massive behavioral anomaly.
Yes. This is the detail that will likely define this entire scandal for years to come.
It really is.
Researchers literally ask Kimi K3, who are you? They prompted it for its core identity. And in documented instances, this 2.8 trillion parameter flagship model built by Moonshot AI in Beijing responded, quote, I am Claude.
Claude, of course, being the overarching brand architecture for Anthropic's entire family of models.
I mean, that is the digital equivalent of stealing a car and leaving your wallet on the dashboard.
It's an incredible oversight.
How does an engineering team capable of building a world-class model make a mistake that foundational?
Well, it really speaks to the inherent difficulty of data sanitization in massive distillation projects. Researchers refer to this as the identity crisis phenomenon.
Identity crisis, I love that term.
It's very fitting. When you train a student model entirely on the synthetic outputs of a teacher model, it doesn't just absorb the high-level logic and the coding proficiency.
Yeah.
It inadvertently absorbs the teacher's safety alignments, its conversational tone, and its program's self-identification.
Because out of those 10 million queries Moonshot supposedly ran, some fraction of them inevitably included Fable stating its own identity.
Exactly. The teacher model is explicitly programmed to repeatedly declare, I am a helpful assistant created by Anthropic.
Right, it's hard-coded into its behavior.
Yes. So the student model ingests all of that data and learns that this specific string of tokens is the statistically correct way to respond to any query regarding identity.
Wow.
The student mimics the teacher so perfectly that it fundamentally forgets it is the student.
That is just wild. And it raises a really fascinating philosophical question about the nature of this technology.
That really does.
If an AI's behavior is essentially a perfect mirror of its training data, is it even possible to perfectly scrub the soul or the core identity of the original model when you harvest its outputs?
That's the big question.
But can you ever truly launder stolen synthetic data?
From a purely technical standpoint, achieving perfect sanitization at the trillion parameter scale is just incredibly difficult.
It seems almost impossible.
You would have to deploy aggressive, highly sophisticated filtering algorithms across millions of outputs before using them in the final training run. And you're just hoping to catch every single instance where the original model reveals its specific safety alignment or identity.
But at this scale, with billions of parameters and millions of properties.
Exactly. Anomalies slip through the net, it's a numbers game, and eventually the model is going to tell on itself.
Now, we should note here, just to remain perfectly impartial and objective regarding the source material, that the White House does acknowledge this behavioral tick is technically circumstantial.
Yes, that is an important distinction.
K3, identifying as Claude, is statistically consistent with distillation, and obviously it is an absolute PR nightmare for Moonshot. But a single output doesn't definitively prove the full grand scope of the industrial espionage alleged by the OSTP.
That is a very necessary caveat. However, the briefing documents also introduce a lot of historical context to bolster the claim.
Right, the February incidents.
Yes. They reference evidence from February 2026, where Anthropic explicitly accused Moonshot, along with two other firms, DeepSeek and Minimax, of utilizing this exact covert distillation technique.
So there is a clearly established pattern here. The victim company has been sounding the alarm on this specific vector of attack for half a year already.
Yes.
This establishes a motive and a historical baseline of suspected behavior.
It does. But as we analyze these documents, we also have to confront the inconsistencies, because the OSTP briefing contains one massive logical gap that really complicates the White House's perfectly neat narrative.
Right. This is where we need to talk about the timeline problem. Because as I was reading through the chronological sequence of events in the brief, the math simply does not work.
The timeline is very tight.
It's beyond tight. Anthropic's Fable 5 model, the specific version Moonshot allegedly distilled, was only made publicly available via API on July 1st.
That is correct, July 1st.
Kimi K3 launched, fully trained and totally operational, on July 16th. That is a 15-day window. Now, if you are an engineer listening to this, you know the physical limitations of these hardware clusters. How do you theoretically distill a 2.8 trillion parameter model in just 15 days?
The consensus among the technical experts cited in the secondary analyses is that it is highly implausible, bordering on completely physical impossible.
Because there's just so much to do.
Exactly. You have to account for the time required to successfully spoof the APIs, gather the millions of outputs, filter the synthetic data for quality control, format it for the new architecture, and then actually execute the massive training run on a cluster of GB300 chips.
That's not a weekend project.
No. Even running at maximum theoretical efficiency, a training run for a model of that sheer volume typically requires months of continuous compute. 15 days is quite literally a blink of an eye in large-scale AI development.
So the timeline forces us into one of two logical deductions here. Either the official timeline is wrong or the scope of the theft is being misrepresented. Let's explore the first deduction.
Okay. The first deduction is that Moonshot had unauthorized, highly covert access to Fable long before the July 1st public launch.
Okay, so they were already inside.
This would imply they were inside Anthropic systems during the limited enterprise preview phase, or even more concerning, during the period when the U.S. government had explicitly banned the model from public access.
If that is true, they were already siphoning the intelligence data before the wider world even knew Fable 5 existed.
Exactly.
That elevates this from a sketchy violation of terms of service to top-tier state-sponsored cyber espionage.
It certainly does. It changes the entire threat model. But we must also entertain the second deduction just to maintain our analytical rigor here.
Right.
It is entirely possible that the U.S. government is exaggerating Fable's role in Kimi K3's core development.
Meaning that Moonshot actually did build the vast majority of Kimi K3 organically, like using their own data sets and internal engineering, but they just utilized Fable 5 at the very end of the cycle for fine-tuning.
Exactly. They may have used a smaller scale, much more targeted distillation process strictly for the final alignment phase, basically polishing the model's reasoning in those final 15 days.
Just giving it that final American sheen.
Right. Now, that would still technically constitute unauthorized distillation, but it would fundamentally alter the narrative.
Because it wouldn't be a 100% stolen clone.
Exactly. It would mean K3 is a genuinely powerful Chinese-built engine, just with stolen American finishing touches.
This highlights why it is so vital to hold multiple perspectives when you are analyzing geopolitical intelligence. We must acknowledge the caveats and the blank spaces in these briefing documents.
And there are many blank spaces.
There are. For instance, Kratsios hasn't disclosed the mechanism of discovery. We don't know if the U.S. acquired this intelligence through aggressive cyber surveillance, or maybe a human whistleblower within Moonshot, or just proprietary telemetry data provided directly by Anthropic.
We have no idea. And the lack of a legal finding is also highly critical here. These are executive branch allegations. No international court has ruled on the veracity of this evidence.
It's just a white paper right now.
Exactly. Furthermore, the responses from the accused parties are notably absent. Moonshot has not issued a technical rebuttal whatsoever, and China's foreign ministry simply deflected inquiries to a much lower-level spokesperson.
And while that silence is certainly conspicuous, it is not an automatic admission of guilt. We really want to reiterate to you, as the listener, that our objective today is not to endorse a political viewpoint or pick a side.
No, our job is to look at the data.
We are impartially analyzing the raw material provided. The allegations are highly credible, they are sourced from senior intelligence and technology officials, and the behavioral evidence of the identity crisis is undeniably compelling.
Very compelling.
However, at this hour, they remain strictly allegations.
Right. But to fully grasp the weight of these allegations, we need to step back and look at the broader geopolitical arc. Because this specific incident regarding Moonshot and Anthropic does not exist in a vacuum.
No, it's part of a much bigger story.
It is the explosive culmination of months of escalating tension over global AI governance.
The timeline of events leading up to this moment reads like a tech thriller. Let's just recap the last few months for context.
Sure.
Earlier this year, the U.S. government took the unprecedented step of actually banning Anthropic's Fable 5 model for 18 days, citing severe national security concerns regarding its capabilities.
Unprecedented intervention.
Right. They deemed the raw intelligence just too potent to release into the open ecosystem without further safeguards.
Yes.
Shortly after that ban, enterprise analytics firms reported a quiet but massive shift. 46% of U.S. enterprise AI usage was suddenly migrating to Chinese models, primarily driven by aggressive price undercutting.
The economics were just too good to ignore for enterprises.
Exactly. Then Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a major keynote at the World Artificial Intelligence Conference, signaling a definitive, state-backed push for China to lead global AI governance and standards.
Setting the stage.
Setting the stage. And immediately following that speech, Kimi K3 drops, absolutely dominates the benchmarks, and is universally hailed as the definitive proof that China had achieved technological parity.
The prevailing narrative was that American export controls had just completely failed to stifle Chinese innovation, and that domestic engineering had simply outcased the restrictions.
But look at the profound irony revealed by this OSTP briefing.
It's incredible.
According to the White House, the very model the U.S. government banned in order to keep it out of the hands of foreign adversaries was allegedly accessed by a foreign adversary anyway, and it was likely accessed during the ban itself. And they used that supposedly secured intelligence to build the exact model that the whole world just celebrated as China's ultimate organic victory.
It forces policymakers to confront an incredibly uncomfortable reality regarding global tech policy right now.
I mean, did the sweeping export controls and model access restrictions completely fail their primary objective?
It certainly appears that way. The Commerce Department banned the physical Blackwell chips, and the OSTP restricted the software model.
They locked both doors.
They did, yet, according to these very documents, Moonshot managed to acquire unrestricted access to both.
This incident suggests that the current regulatory framework is fundamentally mismatched to the technology it seeks to govern.
Completely mismatched.
You can draft executive orders and ban software on paper all day long. But if you cannot control the flow of APIs, and if you lack the jurisdiction to trace every single cloud computing request across global proxy networks,
which you do?
Right. And if entities can simply spin up shell corporations to rent third-party hardware in non-aligned nations like Thailand, then the regulations are essentially a sieve.
The technology just routes around the legislation like water around a rock.
That is a perfect analogy. We are attempting to regulate this ethereal, borderless network using the clunky tools of physical 20th century statecraft. So where does this leave you? If you are a developer listening to this, an enterprise IT leader, or simply someone who utilizes AI in your daily workflow, how does this massive geopolitical drama impact your immediate future?
This is a critical question.
Because there's a massive deadline looming over this entire situation, July 27.
Yes. This is where the abstract world of international espionage crashes directly into the practical reality of software engineering and enterprise deployment.
Moonshot had publicly committed to releasing Kimi K3's open weights on July 27th.
That's right.
Now, for listeners who might be new to that specific term, releasing the open weights means making the actual core architecture and the trained parameters of the AI available for anyone to download.
You don't have to access it via an API anymore.
Exactly. You can put it directly on your own corporate servers and run it locally with total privacy. Given its performance on the benchmarks last week, it was positioned to be the most highly anticipated open-source release of the entire year.
But the explicit threat of U.S. Treasury sanctions casts a highly disruptive shadow over that impending release.
Walk us through the actual mechanics of those sanctions. What actually happens if the Treasury Department acts before July 27?
If sanctions are deployed, the consequences for Moonshot are instantaneous and catastrophic.
How so?
They'll likely be severed from the dollar clearing system, effectively freezing their ability to process international payments or conduct global commerce in U.S. dollars.
Wow.
They would be entirely blocked from utilizing U.S.-based venture capital. And crucially, any existing business partnership with a U.S. entity would instantly become toxic, if not explicitly illegal.
So the U.S. government could legally block the open source release from happening at all, simply by crippling the company's financial infrastructure.
Or conversely, even if Moonshot manages to upload the weights to an international server somewhere, the legal liability for an American company to download and utilize them becomes astronomical.
And this is the most critical, actionable insight for you listening right now. If your engineering team was holding off on a deployment, planning to download and self-host Kimi K3 next week to build your internal tools, you need to hit pause immediately.
Absolutely. Stop right now.
The legal and compliance risk of hosting what the U.S. government currently categorizes as stolen, sanctioned intellectual property inside a corporate environment is simply too high.
You do not want that liability.
No. You do not want your company's proprietary data architecture built on a foundation that could trigger a federal audit or massive intellectual property litigation.
It represents a profound corporate liability. You would essentially be integrating deeply contested IP directly into your proprietary systems.
Yeah, it is a massive risk. But while Moonshot is navigating this existential crisis, it is fascinating to contrast their situation with the movements happening in the West.
It's a very different vibe over here right now.
Because the industry isn't hitting pause while this drama plays out in the headlines. On July 22, the exact same day the White House leveled these allegations, we saw what many are calling the legitimate Western response launch.
Yes, the introduction of OpenAI's Presence platform.
Let's explore presence for a minute, because it represents a complete divergence in how we think about the AI race. It isn't just another parameter count battle.
No. While the geopolitical sphere is entirely consumed by the debate over who possesses the smartest foundational model and who is distilling whom, OpenAI is heavily pivoting toward the infrastructure layer.
Right.
The Presence platform is not just a chatbot. It is an enterprise agent system. It is designed to securely and seamlessly connect advanced AI models directly to a corporation's internal nervous system.
Meaning their proprietary databases, their secure Slack channels, their internal email servers, and their encrypted file systems.
Exactly. So instead of fighting over the raw intelligence of the brain, they are building the central nervous system that allows the brain to actually move the body.
I love that. It is the critical application layer that transforms AI from this fascinating parlor trick into a genuinely useful integrated tool in a production enterprise environment. What is so fascinating about this dichotomy is the strategic divergence. The geopolitical battle is raging over the distillation of foundational models, essentially fighting over the raw commodity of intelligence. Meanwhile, the West is aggressively investing in the plumbing.
It is the equivalent of fighting a brutal war over who controls the deepest oil well, while the other side is quietly paving the highways and building all the gas stations.
That is an incredibly apt way to view it. The foundational models, whether through organic innovation or alleged distillation, are inevitably becoming commoditized.
They are.
The true lasting value capture is rapidly shifting toward the secure infrastructure required to deploy those models effectively.
So, to synthesize this incredibly complex, rapidly shifting reality we find ourselves in today, the overarching AI race is no longer simply about who can top a coding benchmark on GitHub.
No, that is the old paradigm.
The new paradigm is a complex, four-part question that every single enterprise leader, developer, and policymaker has to answer. Number 1, who built the model? Number 2, with whose proprietary data? Number 3, on whose physical silicon? And number 4, under whose regulatory jurisdiction?
And for Kimi K3, the model that appeared to be the definitive, undeniable winner just a few short days ago, every single one of those 4 questions is now heavily contested on the global stage.
It has been a true whiplash experience for everyone tracking this.
It really has.
Yeah.
We have gone from universally celebrating what appeared to be a monumental breakthrough in global open source technology, a huge win for developers everywhere, to meticulously dissecting what may be the largest state-level intellectual property heist in history.
This entire saga serves as a potent reminder for you as both a consumer and a practitioner of this technology.
Absolutely.
To remain genuinely well-informed in this space, you have to look past the initial press releases, past the flashy benchmark scores, and past the polished PR narratives.
You have to dig deeper.
You do. It requires a willingness to understand the highly complex, often unseen, and frequently messy reality of how these multi-trillion parameter systems are actually forged behind closed doors.
We are seeing exactly how the sausage is made, and we're discovering that the core ingredients might actually belong to someone else entirely.
Exactly.
Which leaves us with a final lingering thought to explore as we wrap up today's deep dive. We started by discussing this as a theft, a classic heist.
Right.
But AI is not a physical commodity. If a multi-trillion parameter artificial intelligence can have its entire brain essentially taste-tested, its logic extracted, and its neural pathways copied across international borders without anyone noticing until the clone is already deployed.
It's a scary thought.
It is. Does the traditional concept of intellectual property even exist anymore in the age of generative AI? Or are we entering a borderless Wild West where whoever possesses the most raw compute power will simply absorb, distill, and own everyone else's innovations? Keep questioning the foundations of the technology you use every day. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.